Good afternoon. My name is Alexis Holmes and I'm the Channel SE for UK and Ireland. Some of you may know me already and some of you may not. Today I'm going to be talking to you about SonicOS 6.2.5 and I'll also be covering our up-and-coming Capture feature along with the content filtering version 4.0 service as well, which is also up and coming. So without further ado, I will get the show on the road. So 6.2.5 is an attempt to essentially bring all our different firmwares together. So if we look at everything from the little Soho all the way up to the NSA range and also going beyond that to the Supermassive 9600, they're all running various different builds of 6.1 all the way through to 6.2. Now, the whole idea is that we're going to try and consolidate all of that into a single firmware with 6.2.5. And this is what we've done. Now, the 10,000 series Supermassive and the 9800 series Supermassive are both bladed systems. So because of this, they run slightly different operating systems, so they're not going to be in the consolidation. But everything from the Soho all the way up to the 9600 is all single platform, so we're going to have a unified OS. Now, after 6.2.5, you've got 6.3 coming towards the end of the year, but beyond that, what we've got is the attempt to bring the Supermassive range in line with the other Gen 6 products, so we have a truly unified firmware across all builds. Now, this has already landed as a firmware and it landed at the very last day of March, so some of you may have encountered this already. A few of you may not have done. As I said, anything from Soho Wireless all the way up to a 9600, it's there and available for you now. Now, I'm just going to go through some of the features that we have within this. There's a whole slew of features and a few bits that have been standardized that I'm going to go through. And the first bit I'm going to go through is the DPI-SSL enhancements. Now, this is a feature on our firewalls and it's proved very popular. And it came for free as standard with the new TZs, but it was charged for the NSAs. Going forwards, all NSAs sold since April will now include a DPI-SSL license as standard, and there will be no charge for that. So one of the big things that we've seen is with DPI-SSL's popularity is a lot of people want to use it to decode and decrypt a lot of SSL traffic, a lot more than they realise. And what we found out is the connection counts have been eaten up rather quickly. So to get around this, what we've done is we've done quite a lot of work in the back end to try and free up some memory that we can allocate to these SSL connections. And this is what we've done. So if we look at this, we can see in the Supermassive range, 9200 is really the only firewall that stayed stationary, but even the 92, above the 92, but even the 94 and the 96, they've jumped upwards of 50%. The mid-range is really where it's all at. So if you look at sort of the NSA range, what we're seeing here is a bare minimum of 100% increase in the total connection count. And actually, if you look sort of the entry-level NSAs with the 3600 and the 4600 and 2600, there are some significant bumps in connection count. And this is really going to help you deploy that DPI-SSL feature and really make the most of it for your customers. On top of this, we've also added support for TLS 1.2 and SHA-256. So this will basically keep us compliant with all the latest encryption methods, so we'll still be able to decrypt that as well. So this is really going to give us a greater level of stability and much more compatibility than we've had up until now. Now, there are an awful lot of enhancements that have come into the appliance, quite a lot, as you can see from all these bullet points, but really the idea of it was to make it easier for you to deploy DPI-SSL, make it easier to troubleshoot your deployment of DPI-SSL as well, but giving you more flexibility in how you can roll it out. And this has been really done through a lot of different things. Probably the most important one that we've seen is flexibility in our DPI actions. Now, we can choose to exclude certain traffic either based upon protocol level within within the firewall, so we can exclude protocols specifically. So if we look here in Gateway Antivirus, we can choose to exclude certain DPI-SSL traffic, or we can do it on an object level. So we can now say, well, actually, we've got some predefined objects. What we're going to do is we're going to use DPI-SSL, and we're going to bypass all the services, or we just want to bypass IPS or spyware or gateway AV. So it allows you to bypass certain types of traffic should you want to. Now, we've refreshed the GUI, and one thing that you'll notice straight away is we've gone from a single screen with a lot of scrolling to now a tab delineated screen where you can choose which section you want to go into. And in doing this, we've added a lot more options in the same amount of space without it feeling as crowded as it used to. Now, just remember that when you go to deploy DPI-SSL, it's off by default. So if you want to enable it, you will need to enable it here. Also, when you do enable it, it will enable it globally for all traffic, so you really need to choose which services you want to enable it for and really limit the devices that you're going to be using it on. One of the other enhancements we see is a lot of people used to have a lot of trouble tracking where all their connection count went, and actually this gives you the ability to see what your maximum connection count is, where you've peaked at, and what you're currently at. So if you are already bottling out and you're basically hitting that maximum, it will give you a good idea that, okay, I need to start reining this in. Or if you're not and you're being very frugal, then obviously it will show you how much room you've got to expand with your DPI-SSL connection count. Another feature that we've added for granularity and control is this is born out of the content filtering engine. We've borrowed the 64 category based system. And now what you can do is, with web traffic, it was fully arbitrary. We would just basically do decryption on all HTTPS traffic if you were choosing to do that. But now what we can say is, well, actually, HTTPS web traffic, we're not interested in certain things. So in this example, what we can see is we're actually going to exclude health, online banking, and brokerage. So we're kind of pulling several bits out, but we're going to scan everything else. Conversely, you can use this as an include, so you can actually choose which categories you do want to decrypt and scan. So this, rather than examining all of your web traffic, we're now limiting to the web traffic that we need to scan. And this means that you can actually get a lot more done within your DPI-SSL limited connection count. Other things we've done to really ease the deployment is we've included a predefined bypass list that is on your firewall. And these will be for all the common sites where there may be certificate errors and known and trusted sites, so windowsupdate.com as an example. However, this is your list, so if there are things in there that you definitely do want to include, it's very easy just to edit this list and remove what you want from it. You can reject any of the built-in connection exemptions that are already in there. Now, another thing that we've added as well is to give you the ability to do it your way. So you can see we've got the audit new built-in exclusion domain names prior to being added for exclusion option. But what does this mean? Well, when we get a firmware update onto the firewall and this checkbox is enabled, you will see on your title screen on your status, we will see that new common name exclusions are available. Now, if you click the link, you will be presented with a pop-up box, and this will show you all of the new additional sites that will be added to your firewall for exclusion. Now, it's up to you what you want to add and if there are things in there already that you want to delete. So this means that you can have us do as much of the heavy lifting as you want to, or you can take full control and decide exactly every little bit of information that's going to be bypassed by your DP engine. So this really takes a lot of the hassle away, but it also gives you that granularity of control should you want it. Now, we also have common name exclusions, so this essentially will allow us to block multiple entries at once. We also support the ability to tie your domain name to a CFS category should that be needed. We can skip authentication failures for a particular site, so if you are getting failures, you can essentially whitelist it should you need to. Now, we also offer the ability to support wildcards, so we can now support subdirectories and as well as subdomains. So now you could choose to exempt or include news.bbc.co.uk as opposed to bbc.co.uk or bbc.co.uk/news. So there's a whole host of different ways that you can roll that out. Now, within the common name list where you can do your inclusions and exclusions, what we also have is a little button in the top right corner that says Show Connection Failures. Now, this is particularly useful from a troubleshooting standpoint. If you're going to be rolling this out and you've got some application data that seems to no longer be working, or an application can't connect, you may want to head over here and click on the Connection Failure button. This will give you a list of all of the failed connections that have been using SSL that can't get out, be they web-based or application-based. Now, before, if you were having trouble with things like this, you'd have to spend a while setting up some complex packet captures and really going through the nitty and gritty. What we've done now is we've actually pulled this up, and any SSL errors there are, we will show these up here, so then you can see where they're failing. And then in doing so, if it is a whitelisted application that you don't want to use DPI-SSL on, then you can quite easily click the checkbox and click the exclude button. The next section I'm going to talk about is the Dell X-Series switch integration feature. So this is something that came about out of a bit of skunk works a while ago. Now, this is first talked about when I was over in California just over 2 years ago, and the idea was to really give additional port density to our existing firewalls. Now, historically, we've had firewalls with 24 port switches attached. So if you look at something like the old Pro 1260, which was essentially a TZ170 with a 24 port switch gaffer taped to it, or we had the 2400 MX, which was a NSA 2400 with a switch integrated. These have proved to be very popular because in the smaller business deployments, there is a need still to have high port density, but you may not wish to go out and get an additional switch to do this. So one of the things that's been plaguing a lot of businesses, especially with our smaller end with TZ, is obviously you're going to need to log in and manage a switch separately. You're going to log into your firewall and manage that. And if you've got wireless, you're going to need to log in and manage that. Well, we're looking at making deployment as easy as possible for you, the reseller. So what we've done is we've paired up with the Dell networking department, and their brand new X-Series switches are fully integrated in with our firewalls. Now, we offer a whole suite of different options here, so everything from an 8-port switch all the way up to a 52-port switch. Now, some of them are PoE and some are even PoE Plus, so there's something for everybody. They're all energy efficient and carry Dell's lifetime warranty. So, truly a great product. Now, the integration with the firewalls is really, really good. So, I can say that, but essentially, what it will mean is you can manage that switch entirely from the firewall's GUI, which essentially means you don't have to go anywhere else to manage that firewall. Now, one of the knock-on effects of this is the SonicWall GMS or Global Management System allows you to configure and deploy multiple firewalls with ease, and that's the whole point of GMS. Now, what you can do here is for any given site, you could have a SonicWall firewall which would be managed by GMS. Now, within the firewall GUI, you could manage a SonicWall WXA appliance for WAN acceleration to additional sites. You could manage a Dell X-Series switch and with a phone system attached to it, and you could manage a wireless access point with the Dell Sonic points, and all these 3 different devices would all be managed through the firewall GUI. And because they're managed through the firewall GUI, they will show up in the firewall configuration options and management options of the global management system. So hence you have one pane of glass, which will be GMS, which will allow you to manage your firewall, switch, WAN acceleration and wireless all from a single point. Now the beauty of this is if you've got a distributed deployment like a retail chain, it means that you can then take that configuration and replicate it and replicate it and replicate it and so on and so forth. A good example of this was GameStop in the US, with over 50,000 firewalls and switches deployed, which has basically allowed them to push this out very easily with GMS. So it's extremely scalable and very easy to do. The idea of this being then you've got a single pain point, you've got a single screen where you can log in and configure everything. Obviously, because of ease of deployment, you've got lower operating costs, and this converged infrastructure essentially gives you everything that you would need to deploy an office. So how complex is the X-Series switch integration? Well, it's pretty easy to deploy. All you need to do is put the switch into management mode, and then once you've done that, you need to uplink it to the firewall. So you connect to the firewall, and then within the firewall, you would define where your uplink is. So in this case, we can see that port 2 on the switch is linked to X3 for the uplink. And this essentially allows you to manage everything from within the firewall. So very easy to do, and as you can see, it just sits within Port Shield with all your other ports on your firewall. Now we've got full support for VLANs. You can essentially add the switch and it will be treated as a part of the firewall. It also means that all the security service and everything else are managed by the firewall. On top of this, all the diagnostics and reporting for the switch is also integrated within the tabs. If you see at the top, we've got external switch diagnostics there. So this is compatible with the full TZ range, everything from the TZ300 up to the TZ600. Regrettably, the SOHO isn't supported as it runs 5.9. And this is also the switches that are available that will be compatible are everything from the 1008 all the way up to the 4012. So you've got 5 different switch variants that you can pick from as well. So there are 4 basic configuration types that you'll probably delve into. So first thing to think of is that we can support a single switch. Now you can use this as a standard port density increase, or the other things that you can do as well is you can choose to have multiple switches. We support up to 2 X-Series switches per firewall, and if you deployed this with 52 port switches, you'd be looking at over an additional 100 ports. So that's a significant amount of port density that you could get there. As well as doing that, we support VLANing. Now, VLANs would have to have dedicated links for the trunks, but you could then put VLANing through the switches as well, which would be very useful in certain situations. And again, lastly, we can use the switches to link 2 TZs together for high availability for resilience. So if we take the first option for a single switch deployment, you're going to define the common uplink. So in this case, we've got X4 connected through to G6. So to add a switch, as I said, you need to put it into management mode. Once you've done this, if you go into the firewall, go to Network Port Shield Groups, and go to External Switch Configuration and click Add Switch. You will be presented with this dialog box which will pop up. Now, as you can see, there is a switch ID of 1, and there are 2 options in here, 1 and 2, because we can support up to 2 switches. Once you've set your switch ID, you need to essentially tell it which model of switch you're using, then define the IP address for it, give it an administrator login credentials, choose which port you want to use for management, and which ports you're going to be using for uplink. Once all of this is done, you will see that it will appear below in your port shield groups, just below, and you can see that you've got your little green status light to show that your switch is up and connected. Now, if you click port graphics, you can then start playing with the different port shield configurations. So as you can see in this case, we've got 6 going to X4 for the uplink, but none of the other ports are currently used. Now, once you've got that connected, you may want to move your management port off. So as you can see in this case, we've moved management port off of the uplink and we moved it on to port 1. So that's what we've done there. And we can also see that we've got a port shield group which includes X5 with ports 15, 17 and 19 on the switch. So as you can see, your port shield groups don't have to be grouped either on the firewall or on the switch. They can reach across. So if we take a look at port 3 and we click configure, what we can do here is we can click the configuration options, and then within general, as you can see, we've got this enabled, and we're going to port shield 3 to X4 on the firewall. And then that would then bring that port shield group across. Now, if you wanted to add another switch, again, you would come into port shield groups and external switch configuration, and much like you did with the first switch, you'll populate that with all the details that you would need. The only differentiator here is you would need to set your ID to 2 instead of 1, because it would be the second switch. Once you've done that, everything else will be set up in exactly the same way. Now, if you're going to be using VLANing, you just need to remember that you need to give them dedicated uplinks. So if we look at this deployment, what we've got here is we've got X6 linked to port 7, and we've also got port 2 connected to X3. So we've already got a couple of dedicated uplinks that are in there. And essentially what that will allow us to do is, by pairing up the uplinks to the ports, is you can essentially trunk your VLANs down them. So if you click on VLANs, you can see which VLANs you wish to enable on the trunk. The final common way that you'll see for deployment is deploying an HA. And as you would do with any other HA deployment, you would use this to essentially mirror all of your inputs and outputs on your firewall, and this can easily be done using the switch in order to do this. So nice and easy to deploy, and again, very easy to add. Now, as well as all of that, all of the reporting that you would want for the switch is there, so you can be alerted if the switch drops, or if any other things happen with it. You can set alerts for high traffic and various other bits. We've got full access to diagnostics, so if we have a look here, you can see a breakdown of total packets traversing on an interface, where the interface is up or down, amongst other things. And then we've also got advanced extended statistics that will show you your RX and TX bytes as well as if there's any errors or collisions, so you can get a full suite of diagnostics. On top of that, you can also reboot the switch directly through the firewall, so there's no need to leave the firewall in order to refresh the switch. And on top of that, should you go to the Dell site and download new firmware for the switch, you can even update the firmware for the switch directly through the firewall's UI. So it truly is a single portal to manage both devices. I would like to thank you for your time. Now I'm just going to move on to the Dell SonicWall Capture service. So here's the plants I've logged into. So by looking at this, what we can see is the new Capture service. So what is the Dell SonicWall Capture service? One moment. I just need to enable the capture service. If I just come down to settings, there we go. There we go. So the capture service is now being enabled, and I'm just going to choose the file types that we've got there. So exactly what is the capture service? So the capture service is Dell SonicWall's sandboxing system. So why do we have this? Well, one thing that has become prevalent over the last couple of years is malware, and cryptoware being one of the prime offenders. Now, what we're seeing is that while Gateway Antivirus and Desktop AV is very good at capturing what has been out and about, you're always going to have a vulnerability window of about 48 hours for anything new that comes out before signatures are created and rolled out to the firewall. So if you look at this in this instance, that's a window of vulnerability where existing signatures won't catch it. Now, you may find that there are mutexes of existing malware that essentially don't get picked up by signatures. They could be net new malware. Either way, they'll slip through the cracks. The problem is there always has to be a patient zero. Somebody has to be infected. If they're not, then obviously if they're not infected, this means then that a signature can't be created because you don't know that the malware or virus exists. So this can be a real problem. So the idea of sandboxing technologies is that they can essentially evaluate what a file is going to do over an accelerated period of time. So they can say, right, over the next 3 months in accelerated time, which will happen in the blink of an eye, what will actually happen in a user environment with this file? And the idea is it can then see whether or not if it's malicious and whether or not it can do any harm to the system. Now, one of the problems that we found is some of the sneakier malware can detect whether it's running on a virtual machine. So in some cases, it will do things like look at the graphics adapter and say, oh, it's a VMware virtual graphics adapter. I'm on a virtual machine. I won't do anything. I'm obviously in a sandboxing environment. So this is one of the problems that a lot of our competitors have with their sandboxing technologies is they use a sandboxing solution. And if you have a piece of malware that can detect it's within that particular type of sandboxing solution, then obviously it will slip through. So one thing that Dell SonicWall has done differently is we have 3 completely different sandboxing technologies that all work in different ways. And the idea behind this is a layered security approach. So if something does happen, what you can do is we can then say, right, okay, what we're going to do is if it slips through the first one, it's probably going to get caught by the second, and if not the second, the third, because they're all fundamentally different technologies that work in different ways. It gives us a much greater catch rate. On top of that, we've partnered with VirusTotal, and we also scan with over 50 AV engines at the same time. So it really is a fully comprehensive sandboxing solution. Now, how hard is it to deploy? Well, you see me do it. It takes seconds. It's as simple as enabling the Capture Advanced Threat Protection. It really is that easy. Now, once you've enabled it, I would urge you to also use the block until verdict option. So what will happen with this is once it's enabled, if something comes along and it is deemed to be suspicious, it will be sent to our sandboxing engine for evaluation. Now, if block until verdict isn't enabled, that file will continue on its merry journey, and depending on how big the file is, the report may come back quickly enough from the sandboxing engine to stop the file proceeding, or if it's a particularly large file, the file will make its way into the network. Now, with block until verdict enabled, this can add a little latency, but what this will do is it will essentially stop anything malicious slipping through the gaps until we know for sure that it's clean. So all of this runs in the cloud, and what's wonderful about this is it will essentially remove any overhead from your firewalls. So it makes life an awful lot easier for you. It means that you don't have even more performance loss. On top of this, other benefits include the fact that because it's cloud-based, new features can be added to the capture service without it having to be a firmware update for the firewall as well, which is extremely handy. Now, you've seen how easy it is to enable, but on top of that, you get a dashboard. Now, obviously, I've just enabled this, so there's not going to be a whole lot of data there, as you can see, because nothing's passed through. And I doubt we have anything in the scanning history either, if you just give me a moment. But well, we have a few things that have tried to come through. So if we look at the scanning history, what we can see is all the files that have automatically gone through. Now, what's quite nice with this is if something malicious comes in, obviously you'll be alerted. And we can look at a regular one, but let's have a look at the scanning report for something malicious that's been caught by the sandboxing engine. So by looking at this, what we can see is we've got jump list here at the top to work our way through, or we can just scroll through. Now you're going to get a full breakdown of the file along with its checksums, whether it's malicious or not, whether or not VirusTotal has found anything with it. Moving on from there, with our pre-installation environments, we can see what's been going on there as well. On top of that, we can see the DLLs it's been leveraging. Coming down further, we can see if it's opened up any connections, what ports it's talking out on, and what IPs it's talking to. Continuing further down from there, what we're also going to see is what hosts it's been talking to as well. And on top of that, if it's modified or installed any new files, it will give you a full history of everything created, installed and modified by the malware. On top of that, you'll also see any registries keys that have been changed or added or deleted as well. So you've got a complete history of where it is, so should you need to go and manually remove it, you can do so. I keep coming down just a little bit further. What we'll also see is what sort of behavior, so we can see whether this is a mutex or a variation of a different bit of malware. And also we can see its behavior as well, so we can see how it's been essentially behaving and acting on the host system. So this is a really full-on report that gives you everything that you would need to know about the file. Now what's nice about this is once we've categorized a file, it is held in a staging area on our sandbox system in the cloud, and what will happen there is it will then be fully evaluated just to make sure it's not a false positive, and then it will be then rolled out as a signature to all our other firewalls as soon as possible. So that's a very rapid remediation that allows us to generate signatures even quicker, so everybody benefits. Of course, you might say, well, then why do I need it? Well, if other people have the grid system and they find something malicious, it means you get that signature before it even lands on your system. So obviously there are definite benefits to that. As well as that, the sandboxing engine will essentially lock down that 48-hour period of vulnerability, removing it entirely. Now, this is currently in open beta and will be available as a subscription service in July. We'll be offering this as a separate standalone capture service, along with the new updated CGSS Plus, which is the CGSS bundle, bundled also with the capture service. So now I've talked about the Dell SonicWall Capture service, I am just going to move on and start talking about the new content filtering version 4. So content filtering, I'm sure most of you are familiar with version 1, which is via users and zones, and some of you may have even tried content filtering 3.0 with the application control. Well, content filtering 4.0 is a complete rewrite from the ground up. We've kept a couple of ideas in that have worked well for us, i.e. the 64 category-based system. But other than that, the way that the engine functions has changed completely. It's a complete rewrite, and it's entirely object-orientated. Now, we've had a few extra features that have come in, which are quite nice. So, for instance, we've added Safe Search, which has been in before for Google, but now we've also included it for YouTube and also for Microsoft Bing. So we've got a bit more flexibility there. We also have the ability to add multiple custom categories, so you can recategorize any site yourself to a completely different category should you want to for filtering purposes. And CFS policies is where you would pull, this is essentially, if I open up the pop-up, this is where you pull all of your objects together into your policy. Now what you'll notice is you can choose which zones you want to have this in, and you can tie it to users and groups as well as source addresses stroke subnets. So you'll find that it's very easy to have different overlapping policies in a particular area that work with different types of machines. So very useful. So how does this work? How is it different to what you're already used to, the CFS4? What you've already to CFS 1 and 3. What you've already seen is that it uses an object-orientated approach for a start. Now, if you come along and we look under Firewall, and we'll see we've got a new heading here of content filter objects. So we're just going to hop in there. Now, what we'll see here is you've got a URL list of objects, and this is where you will define your allow and deny lists. And we fully support subdomains as well as subdirectories as well as wildcards. So you could choose to allow everything from bbc.co.uk/news/staff as an example. So very easy to do. What's quite nice from this is you can now import and export your list however you see fit. Now this makes life an awful lot easier if you want to then predefine lists that you can then bring onto other files for other customers of yours. Next up is the CFS action objects. Now, this is a very dynamic object and will allow you to do lots of interesting things. So as you see, we don't have a default block page, and that's because you need it to define an action object. And within your action object will be your block page. Now, within here, you can see that you've got full HTML that you can completely edit on the fly. And if you have a look at the preview, you can see what you'll get when you block a page. Now, what's quite nice with this is we've really enhanced what's reported on the block page rather than just the site has been blocked by the administrator. What we're seeing here now is we will tell you the full URL of the site that's been visited. We will actually tell you which policy has been hit, which is much more useful, so you know that, right, this shouldn't be being blocked and it's being hit by this policy. And on top of that, we will know which category within that policy is being hit. Also, which can be helpful, is we can see the IP address of the workstation that is trying to attempt to connect to the site. So it may be that it's being caught by a policy where it's a policy that's not blocking necessarily on category but on IP. So you get an awful lot of flexibility there. As well as defining a block page, we also have a confirmation page. So this is very much like a consent page. Now you can choose how often this comes up. It defaults to 60 minutes, but you can say, right, I'm going to have it every 5 minutes or so. Again, it's fully editable. And what we can see in here is we can see the URL, the IP address again, the policy, and the reason. So this will be, which category is caught in. And then we have a confirmation link. So what this essentially means is that you can put confirmation on sites that you don't necessarily want to block, but you wish to alert the user that they are being monitored. So that can be very useful. We also offer full bandwidth management, and this can be enabled on a per policy or a per action basis. And we can either choose to bandwidth ingress, so inbound or ingress and egress, either inbound or outbound, or we can choose to manage both. And lastly, one feature that's been extremely asked for, it's been useful in the workplace and extremely popular for schools, so they've definitely been asking for this, is the passphrase override. Now, if we look at the preview for this page, we can see, much like another block page, you've got the URL, you've got your IP address, your policy, and your category. But then lastly, there's a passphrase entry box. And if you have the passphrase, which would be defined here within the action object, then you can override that web filtering for that site only on that IP of that machine only for a duration of time. For example, 5 minutes on that workstation, you would be able to visit that site. So this is very useful for a school. If little Jimmy wants to do a show and tell on the Ferrari web page and it's been caught, the teacher can then enter in a password which will then override it and allow access to that site. So this is your new action object type. Now you can have as many of these as you want. So you could just say, I will have one action object with a passphrase for consent, and that will be essentially used by all of management or all the teachers. Or in fact, you could have multiple objects with different passwords for different users, depending on how granular you wanted to get. Now, moving down from your action objects, we have the category. Now, under the CFS profile, you'll see, although laid out slightly differently, we still have the 64 categories. Now, what's nice here is rather than traditional CFS where you can choose to block or allow, we can block, we can allow, we can bandwidth manage an entire category rather than a site. We can put a confirmation page on an entire category or a passphrase override on a particular category. So a good example would be for a school sex education, you put a passphrase on so the students can get to it unless they're in a sex ed class, and the teacher could override that. So as you can see, your policy isn't just allowing and denying. You can choose what you want to do throughout your policy. Do you want to allow this type of site? Do you want to block it? Do you want to bandwidth restrict it? Do you want to have a password override? It gives you unprecedented flexibility that you otherwise wouldn't get. Now, all of these objects, as I said, are pulled together under Security Services Content Filter. And you would literally come down here and come to your CFS policy. So if we look at an existing policy, what we can see here is we can see the name of the policy, we can see which zones are affected, whether or not it's coming from a particular source IP address, and then moving down, which users have been pulled into this policy, so everybody behind the firewall is, it's scheduled to be always on, and then we've got our profile and our action. So as you can see, you've got full flexibility, and you can build as many policies as you want and have them overlay within a subnet however you need. This is a really massive improvement over traditional content filtering, while the catch rate's the same. The flexibility in how it's deployed is far greater and far more user-friendly. So I'd like to thank you all for your time, and I hope you found this informative. Thank you very much.